Peace, family. This is Davon Love, Director of Public Policy, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. I'm here again with our illustrious co-host, Dr. Khalil Harris. How you doing, Khalil?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm cool. This is our last episode of the session. Want to first just take the opportunity to thank you for rolling with us for this entire session. As I've said, on numerous occasions, I think this adds good balance just in terms of what you bring to the table. So I appreciate you making the time to roll with LBS and helping inform the people about the legislative process and what's going on in Annapolis.
Anytime. It's important for us to just make sure we have a different lens that connects with people actually closest to the issues. And I'm always delighted to be in the space with family.
Absolutely. So this edition is going to be centered around, we about to round out Women's History Month. And one of the things that, is really important, both to LBS and I'm sure the viewers and those that support our work, is really the work that a lot of Black women do in the legislature. It's really important that people are clear about both the accomplishments, particularly of Black women in the space of the legislature, and also the work that they're doing so that we can be better, more informed, and we can support, that work. So we're going to run down what our general schedule is going to be for this evening. We got a lot that we're going to run down tonight. So what we're going to do first, actually, we're going to have Senator Carter come on in a second, just to talk generally, reflect generally, just on her experience of, being a Black woman in the legislature, and her work, and then she has to run off to do the work of the people. After that, we're going to have a conversation briefly with Nicole, Hansen, Mundell from Alpha Justice, talk a little bit about some of the voting rights work that she's doing, and for her to tell us how we can be more helpful. And then we're going to go to a panel of sisters in the legislature that are holding it down. These are all folks who've been supportive of LBS, folks who, in terms of their values, people that align with the work that LBS does. And so, we see it as our duty to make sure that we shine light, both on the work that they do and just their experience in the legislature. So without further ado, we're going to bring Senator Carter to the screen. How you doing,
Senator?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you? Let me get centered here.
You look good. So, Senator Carter, you are the senior most woman in the state Senate who is from the Black community. You are an elder statesman, though not elderly. And, you have a long lens on, what it's meant to be a Black woman in Maryland's legislature and just a Black woman in politics here in the state of Maryland. Talk to us a little bit about, how you've experienced this session, but also broadly, just what you've seen over time when it comes to serving the community as an elected official, and sometimes being in a position where you are a lone voice fighting for the progress of your people.
Well, thank you so much. First, thanks for having me. I apologize that I don't have a long time because we are in a voting session finalizing police reform we've been working on for 10,000 months. But let me, slight correction. So today actually is the 30th anniversary of Senator Dolores Kelly, her service in the Maryland Senate, and Vincent, who just celebrated her 81st birthday. So I'm old, but not quite the oldest.
Well, you're not old, but you've been around a long time.
But so it's been hard. It's been hard and it's been rough. I'll tell you the brief history that, women and Black people back in the 60s, when they were beginning to be elected, were not even allowed to serve on committee. We've come a long way since then. And when I was elected in the early 2000s, I found that even though we were on committees, they weren't used to us talking much or having an independent voice. And so, many years in the House of Delegates, being for a long time the only Black woman on the House Judiciary Committee. Now I think there's 7 or 8. It's amazing. And now here I am in the Senate, where I am the only Black woman attorney in the Senate, and of course the only Black woman on the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. So, a lot of the same issues. The players are different, the time is different, but a lot of times I find still being the only person, like feeling like I'm paddling uphill with no real supports. Oftentimes I don't feel real supports, and that's not to take anything away from my colleagues like Senator Sidnor and some of the other Democrats on the committee. Absolutely, there are times when there is support and we are of one mind, but a lot of times, many of the heavy lifts this year have been quite challenging. We came into this year hearing from state leadership that this was the year of racial reckoning. This was the year of police reform. So I thought, oh my God, this is great. It's going to be easy, right? Because we're going to be on the same page. But then I find, no, we're still, we want to have justice and racial reckoning, but not too much too soon. We want to go too far with it. So it's been hard. Some of the newer legislators, I'm very envious of them. I think you'll hear from them later on. I'm very envious of them because they came at a time when they have each other for support, and they also have a Black woman speaker. And so symbolically, that means that they are not alone. And frankly, I've seen what's been being done in the House where there's more of an effort to democratize it, to give newer people more positions of leadership and appearance of power. And so I feel like many of them are coming in, they're not seeing the slave plantation that I saw. They are not. And probably when I talk about it, they just probably think, oh, she's kind of radical and extreme. But no, I came into a slave plantation. It was extremely difficult. And I see people now coming into a body that is more willing to embrace Black women and more independent and more progressive thought than what I experienced.
So, will you talk a little bit about what the young woman who is a high school student, college student, who wants to follow in your footsteps, what advice would you give them, particularly if they have the similar value system that you bring? Because just because someone looks like us doesn't mean that they're coming to work towards Black liberation. They may be going along to get along. What advice would you give to someone who is similar to a younger you?
Well, first, the most important thing is if you're interested in being in the political arena, you've got to follow what's going on. You have to know the players, learn the players, and you have to follow politics. You have to really understand what the responsibilities are. What the difference between your local council people and your mayor and your local governing body versus your state versus your federal. Very important to do. But many young people are probably like I was. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was the source of the problem. I met elected officials and they seemed like really good people. And I made an assumption, well, if they're Black in particular, certainly they're doing the best they can to fight for us. I didn't really know what they were doing. I just knew that we weren't getting the results. I assumed they were people of goodwill, but you have to really learn and understand that all of us that are elected to legislative bodies are in institutions, and we can't do anything alone. I always say when I was in the House of Delegates, the House always wins, right? The institution has the power, and you have to learn how to function within the institution and further your cause without being kind of ousted from the institution, if so to speak. Because if you're coming too independent, too radical, you make too many enemies, and then nobody supports anything that you do. So you got to, it's a learning process. You have to learn, how to have discernment and discretion as to what you can do, how you do it, how you operate as a team player when you can, but how you also stay true to your principles. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do because, it's very alluring to not stay true to your principles. If you don't stay true to your principles, you might say, for example, become vice chair or chair of a committee within your second term of office. But if you are not deemed to be, that kind of safe, acceptable appointee to leadership, you could find yourself, for instance, like me. Never been appointed to be chair or vice chair of any committee.
Well, we like where you are because we know that you're for the people. We would love to see you have more autonomy and leadership when it comes to heading a committee, but we certainly appreciate all of the work that you put in and are proud of you. We know you have to go. Will you just share really quickly, a win you think we should be paying attention to and how we build on that? Looking forward to next legislative session since Sine Die is approaching in the next week.
A win A win. One of the big wins, even though it was a long time coming, way too long coming, is of course the HBCU veto override legislation that got filed. I mean, my entire time in the House of Delegates, we were pushing for equity and lack of duplication in programs and adequate constitutional funding for our HBCUs. And finally, we get it. Well, we have a plan anyway. We don't actually have the money. We have a plan to have the money. That's a win. I would say that some of this legislation that we're doing, I'm very happy with some of the juvenile justice legislation that we're doing. We got the governor out of parole, who was a hindrance and impediment to people that should have been eligible to receive parole and receive parole. They weren't getting it. We got the Juvenile Restoration Act passed, which says no longer can juveniles, young people, be sentenced, children, people under the age of majority, no longer can they be sentenced to life without parole. And if they have been sentenced, they get to have a review of that sentence. That's big stuff, and we still have more stuff to come. We got some police reform stuff done. We have more work to do.
So I know you got to go. I think, one thing that, I just want to make sure that, we reiterate, one of the things I think gets said is that you can't, be forceful in your advocacy and be effective. And I just, I think it's important for people to know that, the work that you've done to even get police accountability and all these other issues where they are wouldn't have happened without the years of you cracking the pavement. And even this platform, the work of LBS, all of us in LBS, both in terms of my own personal relationship with you and the relationship you have with many of us in LBS, this platform is made possible by the advocacy that you've done over years. I make it a point to tell people, you were a voice in the wilderness when the O'Malley machine was doing zero tolerance, and very few people were willing to take the risk that you took. And I just want to make it a point to, make sure that, I communicate to you in public that work, is work that all of us are benefiting from. And so I just want to make it a point to make sure that, you hear that and that, the people hear that and that we're all encouraged, that the work will continue. So we know you got to head out and continue to do the work of the people. I want to thank you for spending the time that you were able to give us. So looking forward to, seeing you post session.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say that, it's still a follow up too on Dr. Harris's question. I feel strongly that my source of strength comes not only from my ancestors and from my roots, but it comes from the people. And I think a big difference between me and many of the other legislators that want to have power, want to have important positions, a lot of times I feel like their strength comes from the perception of power or the position or the title. And I think that what I would say to young people is that the true value of being in any position of power or perceived power is what you can bring for your people, what you can deliver for your people. If you're not doing that, then there's really no point in you being there. And so that's the important thing, as people want to aspire to high positions and political positions, that they need to keep in mind. That's critically important. If you aren't bringing something back for your people and serving your people, there's no purpose to you even being there.
So,
Absolutely.
All the support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Going back to voting.
Appreciate you.
All right. So next we're going to bring on Nicole Hansen Mundell from Out for Justice. Hey, Nicole.
You're muted. We want to hear your voice.
Oh, thank you. I was like, my birthday.
Okay.
Hey.
Hi. Can y'all hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Yep, we hear you. We hear you. So Nicole and I had a conversation yesterday about some of the work that Out for Justice is doing around voting for our people that are behind the walls. And so I just wanted to give Nicole opportunity. One of the things that has come up this session, and one of the things that I'll do later on after we talk to our next guest, is just give a brief update from LBS's perspective on police accountability. But one of the things that's come up a lot is this notion of racial justice. And a lot of people are trying to make that pivot to characterize stuff as racial justice. Is trying to dress up stuff like racial justice, but not really do it in a way that shifts power. So Nicole and I had a really similar conversation about that yesterday. And and this was a theme that came up as it relates to the work that Nicole is doing on. So Nicole, if you could just fill us in on, what's going on, what you need us to do.
Oh, wow. Where do I start? I mean, there is a lot, there are a lot of legislative proposals right now that is in jeopardy of, kind of being shelved, right? And one of them is the voting rights bill, the effort to expand voting access to individuals sitting in our prisons and jails that are eligible, right? Yvonne, you know full well, and some of your listeners may or may not know, but there was phenomenal work done in the 2020 election that was led by Black women, Black formerly incarcerated women across the state that went inside of our jails in the middle of a pandemic and registered and made sure that people got the right to vote, that partnered across the state. Aisha Braveboy out there in Prince George's County created a voting program, require her local jail to implement policies around voting. We know that in Moco County, the work was happening around jail voting, not only registering people, but educating individuals. Out for Justice had an on-the-ground game out of this world to ensure that individuals who were sitting in our prisons and jails had access to the ballot. And what we were able to do was, the State Board of Elections reported in their 2020 report that for the first time in history, they ensured ballot access to over 7,000 incarcerated citizens. And we know that predominantly people who are sitting in our prisons and jails are Black and brown individuals, right? And so that was huge. It was huge to finally be able to work with the state board and have them step up and do the right thing. Baltimore County jurisdiction reported over 365 people cast their ballot in the local jails in 2020. And so here we are today with one of the most, they say on a national level, they say we're the #2 most aggressive jail voting bill in the country. Because our bill is not just a cushiony bill that says people have the right to vote, but it actually has accountability. It actually has reporting requirements. It actually has a hotline for people to call behind the walls. It actually allows for an ombudsman that will be paid for by the State Board of Elections to go inside of every jail across the state. It allows for drop boxes to be at every local jail across the state. So who wouldn't want a bill like this, especially our legislators who claim racial equity, who claim that they want to, be reformative, right? Who want to, be regarded as these people doing the work, right? And what we're finding is that we're having a difficult time from a specific legislator. Senator Cory McCray has introduced a legislative proposal originally to, do something like Chicago, which is to bring early voting sites in the local jail. It was a Baltimore specific bill. And we were like, okay, cool, do your thing. We're over here making sure that the State Board of Elections is provided with an infrastructure, right? Because the formerly incarcerated, we don't no longer want to be a part of bills that are sexy and titled. We wanted to make sure that the State Board of Elections had an infrastructure for how we were going to be like Illinois, right? But when that bill, when the Brandon Scott's office came and testified that they were not in support of an early voting center in the local jail, J. Wendell Gordon, who also testified in support of Senator McCray's bill, he even said, "Why is this a local thing? Why not statewide?" They went back. In the Senate spent so much time trying to recraft the bill when we already had existing language that had everything you needed in it, right? And so, Davon, what is unfortunate is that bill that only deals with Baltimore City, it no longer deals with early voting sites. It only deals with drop boxes. And remember, the best bill around drop boxes and accountability is HB 222. And so what we're finding is less aggressive policy is moving faster in the House. We found that Senator McCray's bill even skipped the voting subcommittee and went straight to judiciary. That's not normal for a voting bill of that kind. It's normal that, a voting bill that's coupled with corrections go through the election subcommittee and it's concurred by judiciary. That bill then takes and then, and what we're finding is that The senator is being a part of a policy that does not impact the state, right? That his bill only impacts maybe 7% of the eligible voting population. And I think the issue is that we know that the senator, in his heart supports uh, um, formerly incarcerated people and their right to vote. But we often question, the senator that has ambitions, right? The senator that wants to be something bigger and something, connected to politics that really can't make this aggressive move. That's unfortunate for us because if the Senator bill progresses any further, it will really set us back a few years in terms of requiring the State Board of Election to do the job that they did with us in 2020. That will send a message that the State Board of Elections does not have to engage formerly incarcerated people in other counties, and that they only can attend to individuals sitting in our Baltimore City Detention Center. And that is not what the formerly incarcerated want. We want to ensure that there is accountability, that the State Board of Elections implement voting programs statewide, and we want to make sure that the State Board of Elections ensure that individuals in every county have access to the ballot, Davon. And we just think it's quite disrespectful, right? To only support a voting bill that's only for Baltimore, it really says, forget the Black women who led the work in 2020 in PG County. Forget the Black women who led the work in Moco County, right? Forget about the work that the State Board of Elections did to ensure ballot access to over 7,000 incarcerated citizens. Forget about all of that. Just only support my bill that's specific to Baltimore City.
So, Nicole, thank you. I always love to see you, sis, and you always bring a good word. We know that in the state of Maryland, we have a number one that is deplorable, and that is we have the highest percentage of Black people incarcerated in comparison to our population in the state across all 50 states. So we have the highest percentage of Black folk who are incarcerated here in the state of Maryland.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about what happens if Senator McCrae's bill advances and the work that you all have been doing does not, but also just take that next leap toward 2022, the next legislative session. What kind of work can we support along the way to make sure all of the women who have been fighting for making sure people have access to the ballots, making sure people behind the wall are able to exercise the franchise? How do we step in and push in and support the advocacy efforts of Out for Justice and other organizations and women who are doing this work?
I think we have an opportunity to advance the bill that is sponsored by, that's supported by the advocates, the impacted people, the League of Women Voters, the Common Cause Maryland. You have every voting rights organization and most of the directly impacted communities saying, we want HB 222. This is the bill we want, right? What if Senator McCrae's bill advances? That sets us back at least another 5 years, right? Because the urgency for the state board to implement a voting program, to connect with the other local wardens across the state, it won't be urgent, right? And so it means that some of those other counties that we was not able to touch in 2020 in terms of getting to the warden and making sure the warden gave people access, that fire could die in that county, right? And so what we are asking folks to do is to reach out to their senator and say, listen, we support HB 222. Please advance HB 222 in the Senate, because that is the bill that will ensure full accountability on the part of local wardens, the Baltimore, the State Board of Elections, and every detention center statewide. And so we still have a chance. And that's why I'm here today, Kalila, to ask people to get in touch with your senators, email them, call them, tweet them, Facebook them, let them know that you want them to move HB 222 in the Senate. It's already passed in the House. Now it's time for the Senate, specifically in Prince George's County. Senator Penske is our problem. Me and Delegate Jheanelle Wilkins was just on a prior a show just a couple minutes before, and that's the message. We're targeting the EE committee. We're targeting Senator Penske. We're targeting Senator Kagan, and we want constituents to reach out to them and say, listen, we need a statewide bill, not just a local bill. And contact Senator McCray and ask him, why isn't he willing to support a statewide effort? We know he supports formerly incarcerated people. We know that he wants to ensure that formerly incarcerated people and currently incarcerated people statewide are given an infrastructure around voting. Find out what's his position there.
Nicole, absolutely. And thank you for grounding us in it's not over. The sine die is sine die. And we're not dead yet. So we want to make sure that our listeners and our listeners, neighbor, grandmama, auntie, uncle, that folks are calling not only their own senator, but Senator McCray's office and making sure that he's clear supporting Senate Bill 222 is what is the prudent thing to do, but also the right thing to do. And like you said, we know that he supports people who are formerly incarcerated. So let's impress upon him that the general public, people who are impacted, want to see his leadership on this. And it's important that we don't let our foot off the gas before we move into the closing session. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You guys do amazing work. I'm so proud of y'all too. Thank you so much for making sure you're elevating the voices of the people.
Absolutely.
All right. Peace.
Peace. All right. So we're going to go to our next session, part of the podcast. As we talked about at the top, really wanted to talk with some Black women legislators that have held LBS down, efforts, many of our partners, people who are champions in their own right on issues, racial justice and justice in general. These are folks that I've had the pleasure to work with to varying degrees. So I want to bring to the screen Delegate Jheanelle Wilkins and Delegate Stephanie Smith. It's good to see y'all. Thank y'all for agreeing to join us. I know y'all are really busy. So thank you for making time to join us.
Thank you for having us. And is it Dr. Kalila? What am I calling her today? I want to make sure.
Listen, isn't it a good thing when you're in the midst of family, you're not sure if you're supposed to be like, hey, girl.
I want to keep professional. So
use their Right. You can call me whatever you like on today because we are with family. Good to see you also, Sora, Jheanelle.
Hi, Sora.
It's family. And you ladies have been doing amazing work. So it's Women's History Month. We want to honor the work that you've been doing and make clear to little girls who look like us that power is with us every day, all day. Delegate Wilkins, I see you rocking your crown. The Crown Act is something that Delegate Smith was actively working on and got passed through our legislature, something that has not been passed uniformly, across state legislatures. So we want to hear from you more about, what you're doing this session and what you're trying to drive over the line before we reach sine die.
Absolutely.
You should go next because you'd be a great follow-up to what we just heard in the last panel.
There you go. Let's go.
Yes, definitely. And I want to start by lifting up something our wonderful Senator Carter mentioned. And Stephanie and I were actually talking offline about it because we are fortunate to have sort of that sisterhood and that friendship where we have each other's back, where Delegate Smith is one of my very close allies in the House, and we're commiserating around bills and supporting each other. And that's something that we are so fortunate to have. And so I do want to lift up and show love to the senator and appreciation for how she's helped pave the way for us. But one of the issues I think that's so critical that we have been really leading on and advocating, especially with Delegate Smith and I in the House as members of the Ways and Means Committee, is on ensuring the right to vote. We have passed amazing, really important bills. And I'm also, in full disclosure, I am the new chair of election law, so the bills are amazing to me. But some of the bills that we've passed in the House deal with create a permanent absentee ballot so that people don't have to remember each election. If you want to vote by mail, we'll send you your ballot to you if you sign up to have your ballot sent to you. Making permanent the drop boxes, ballot curing, so that if you make an error on your ballot, if you forget to sign your envelope, that doesn't mean that you're disenfranchised and your ballot is rejected, that you have the opportunity to be contacted and fix that so that we're not having people disenfranchised, tracking your ballot. There's so many great things, expanding the early voting centers. But the fundamental critical issue, I think that we're at a crossroads, building on what Nicole just talked about, is the fact that our eligible incarcerated population, who have just as much of a right to vote as you or I, we're talking about people who are pre-trial, not having been convicted of anything, or people who are serving a misdemeanor in jail, who have the right to vote under Maryland law, but they only get that right if we pass legislation, which in HB 222 creates the information that they have the right to vote. When you're in jail, you're not thinking that you have access to the right to vote. So it includes provisions and requirements around ensuring that they're aware of this via signage, via materials that must be provided to them by corrections and SBE. It also ensures access, a drop box at every single facility statewide. Imagine being in jail, being incarcerated, and you see a drop box placed there before an election, and you ask that question, what's that? Imagine the commitment of the state that the state has to your right to vote by doing something like placing a drop box there. So that access piece and other requirements where SBE has to ensure that they get those applications and get their ballots and things like that. And then accountability, because we need to ensure that corrections and SBE are actually implementing and ensuring that incarcerated individuals have this right. So one of the issues that I definitely want to lift up is around our work on voting and the right to vote, especially in the context which you see happening in Georgia and Arizona, and how we are moving forward in major important ways on reducing barriers to voting, but that we are at this crossroads and the need to ensure that our eligible incarcerated population has that right.
Delegate Wilkins, you went right to what I was going to say in terms of what we see in Georgia. Inversely, we saw in Georgia, Stacey Abrams, another Black woman, be able to rally the vote, right, and make sure that folk got to the ballot to send for the first time 2 senators from the state of Georgia who are Democrats. And, that is a feat in and of itself. And the work that you all have been doing here in the Maryland Statehouse has been impeccable. Before we go to Delegate Smith, talk a little bit about your what it means to you to be an elected official and be able to move the work on behalf of people who may believe they don't have a voice or that others are unwilling to advocate for them.
Absolutely. That's one of the most impactful aspects of being in this seat, being able to utilize my voice, especially for people and communities that are not being heard and on issues that haven't been heard. And I can't say enough about how important it is to have that representation. For me, I represent District 20 in Montgomery County, which is Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, White Oak. I'm the first Black woman ever represented in my district. And Montgomery County in 2018, that was the first time Montgomery County ever elected any Black women at all, just a couple years ago at the state level. And so one of the things that I always think about in particular is the issue of Black women and the health disparities, particularly around giving birth and the high rate of Black women, disproportionate rate of Black women who die as a result. And in my second legislative session, being able to give voice to that issue, we hadn't addressed that in about 10 years. We created a committee to study it. And then we weren't taking up any of the recommendations. There wasn't as much happening on that issue. But again, having that seat at the table, being able to raise it and bring bills and bring coalition of impacted women to the table and impacted communities has just really made the difference. So that's what this seat and this voice means to me, is the people that are behind these bills, the impacted individuals who are really driving me and helping to lead this work for sure.
Yeah, you said a mouthful there, especially around the point that keeps being woven throughout this discussion tonight is the power of the people and how important it is for people to engage their elected official elected officials around issues of importance. I'm a birth worker. I work with new moms on nursing. I appreciate the work of organizations like Bloom Collective here. We have Black Maternal Health Week coming up. I am a mom to 3 daughters. That is a critical issue for me. And, your work in the legislature has been phenomenal. What's also been phenomenal is to see how you Black women in the legislature shout each other out, big each other up through social media and other forms. I love looking on my Twitter feed during the day, and we got Delegate Wilkins saying, okay, here's my sis, Delegate Smith, and she was on the floor, knocking people out. And then Delegate Smith will go, and here's my girl, Delegate Wilkins, and she slayed. Y'all need to go back and watch her committee hearing. So that's huge. Yeah. And something that I never experienced as a young woman who went to college to study political science. So having my daughters able to see that and witness that, is immense, and it makes a difference for the voice that we bring. So Delegate Smith, I want to pitch to you. Talk about what you've been working on this session, and also the importance of being a Black woman who's able to represent their community.
Thank you so much for that setup, because I just wanted to echo what Delegate Wilkins said. We were, again, listening to Senator Jill Carter. I'm like, she took a lot of darts. She took a lot of arrows. She took a lot of heat at a time when it wasn't fashionable to talk about many of the issues she prioritized around criminal justice reform, what have you, just racial justice broadly. And I was telling Delegate Wilkins, it made it easy for other people to be like, I was always there, because she took all the L's and took all the heat a decade before they even, joined the General Assembly. So for me, I just want to big up everyone that paves the way. We're all building upon what others have done. And hopefully there'll be young ladies like your daughters building upon what we're doing even more, But in terms of this session, I really want to focus on just different things as it relates to the economic impact of the situation we find ourselves in. One of the things that Delegate Wilkins hasn't touched upon, but she's been a tremendous warrior and advocate around renters protections. And I mean, that's a whole other panel, but I just want to give, there's so many things that are impacting Black people. So if we want to talk about criminal justice and the intersection between criminal justice and economics, one of my bills that's currently in the Senate, and I'm hoping we can prevail out of the Senate, House Bill 316, is about really relieving the stress for pretrial defendants who are given home monitoring detention, and then these fees that are just beyond, belief. And in many ways, we're, we have some people that are staying inside before they've had a trial, before they've been convicted of anything, simply because they can't afford, hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month to have a home monitoring device. So this bill that passed out of the House not only would eliminate those fees altogether for pretrial defendants that are indigent, but it also would establish a study group to find a sustainable source of funding, so that we can't be like, oh, this is the amount of money we have for this bill, it's run out, we can't do anything. We just knew that we needed an emergency measure to ensure that there was like, hey, let's get this $5 million started, so that we can provide immediate relief, so that no one, particularly in an ongoing pandemic, is staying inside solely because they can afford, before their trial, the home detention devices. And I just want to lift up for your supporters of LBS, because LBS was distinguished on pushing back on bail, the bail reform effort. This is just the new frontier. They're like, okay, no more bail. Let me get in this home monitoring business. It's just a new racket. So, it's just the next frontier really of a similar fight. And I just wanted to make sure that your supporters, and listeners are aware of that, because I mean, sometimes the fees being charged seem rather arbitrary. It's not uniform. And, we shouldn't really be, impoverishing people further when they haven't even had their day in court. And sometimes people have racked up all these fees only to have a case dismissed, but those fees aren't dismissed. They paid that in their real life. And even if sometimes a grandmom or someone else can dip in their savings to help, that's still putting extraordinary stress on a household, a family, for someone that's never been convicted of anything. So I'm very hopeful that we can get some traction in the Senate. But I actually thought we were going to have some headwinds that we might not have been able to overcome in the House. So the fact that we got it out of the House, we just got to keep grinding and keep pushing. So we're hoping that Senate judicial proceedings will get it done for us. Another bill that I've been introducing now for the 3rd session in a row is about prohibiting fees for summer school. I always thought, because our Maryland Constitution guarantees a free and adequate education, that it was really highly inequitable that certain jurisdictions charged nothing for summer school fees and others charged $200-300 per course, right? And I'm talking about your core course that you need to graduate, not enrichment, not additional, just what you need to matriculate through school. You had to have attempted to take the course, were unsuccessful, and now we're trying to take it again. So that bill was already important to me pre-pandemic, but it's even more important to me now because we know good and well people were not receiving education at the levels that the Constitution required, uniformly across this state. So there are going to be people that have not successfully passed core courses, and you're going to charge those people when they might not have had adequate access to online learning or all the different ways, that people were learning in the past year. I find it perverse that we would charge anyone even a reduced fee for summer school under these conditions. So my hope is that we can get that done this session too, because this is my third session in a row putting that bill in. And as we know, our Black children are disproportionately represented in public schools. So this is definitely something that's putting them at a disadvantage. And we all know you have to pay for summer school before you take the class. There's no payment plan for summer school. So some people are not going to be on schedule if they can't, get these courses in. So that's another bill that's important to me. There are some bills that were important to me that I don't know how they're going to fare in the Senate. One that I'll just lift up right now, Senate Bill 41, it was to establish a task force to explore the value of a public bank in Maryland. It passed out of the House after nearly a decade of attempts. It had never made it out of the Economic Matters Committee ever before until this session. It is now in the Senate Finance Committee, where it seems to have visited upon hostile territories. I'm just being real. You can visit the YouTube for more. But the reason why I think this is important, again, to the people that support LBS is that when you have institutions like Harbor Bank, a Black bank that has, limits to their ability to extend capital to others, how much more impactful could our smaller regional banks be, and particularly a Black bank be, if they had a state bank that could help them expand the risk that they could tolerate as an institution? I think that in many ways, we already know that the traditional banking sector has already decided that certain areas of the state are not part of their profit model. They don't care if there's investments there. They don't care to lend there. So the fact that they're threatened by this particular bill when their current model doesn't seem to care if we get access to their services or not, I find that really rich. So at any rate, this is not about really competing with a Bank of America or Wells Fargo. It's about ensuring that the areas of this state that people don't see people lending to them starting businesses, no one's lending to them to purchase a home. How about we help these local smaller banks have a little more reach and a little more tolerance for risk by having a public bank? And it's something that the only state that has one is North Dakota. A pretty homogenous state, also a state that's not really known to be like, a pillar of radical leftism. I don't think anyone thinks of North Dakota that way, but I'll tell you what, they have more small banks per capita because they have this bank at the state ensuring that those banks can take bigger risks and also have a different quality of relationship. They got those PPP loans out to small businesses quickly because those small businesses had relationships with small banks. So many Black businesses, not only in America, but in Maryland and Baltimore specifically, have been decimated during this pandemic. And the current banking infrastructure hasn't been ready to respond to the needs of small and minority-led firms and institutions. So, again, if I have to bring it back next year, I'm going to. But, if anyone has it upon their heart to reach out to Senate Finance, I would endorse that because I think that things that are new can arouse fear in people. I always tell people are not against change. They're against a change that they cannot properly forecast will benefit them. So I still have to, do some work to explain to folks, particularly folks that look like us, that this isn't about being in competition with the Harbor Bank. This is about buoying and providing even more resources to institutions that are really interested in Maryland and not worrying about Bank of America and Wells Fargo and all those other people. So I don't want to filibuster y'all, but I just wanted to, thank you all for letting me share some of those economic things I'm focused on.
So really quickly, Senator Carter talked about the success of the HBCU settlement and over $500,000 for the 4 HBCUs here in Maryland. You then talked about the inequities in K-12 education for Black and Brown youth as it relates to something as simple as summer school and obtaining their constitutional right to a free and adequate education, Article 8 of the Maryland Constitution, our only entitlement. And then you wove that into, a conversation about making sure we have access to capital, and that access to capital has made it possible for redlining and predatory lending to result in the segregation of our K-12 institutions. It is a cycle. It is insidious. These are systems that are intended to make sure the people who were builders of this nation do not benefit from the profits and the resources that came from their blood, sweat, and tears. So I want to hear from you really quickly as we close out. Why is it so important to you to be a Black woman in the legislature, able to advance policies like Senate Bill 41?
Yes, Senate Bill 41. No, House Bill 41.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kalila Lawyer. Give you all your just due. But I just want to say that I feel so blessed because some of you have seen some of the posts I've put on social just about my family. My grandfather never got to vote until my mother in high school registered him to vote for the first time in the late 60s. He was born in 1903. So to think that my grandfather didn't even get to vote till he was a senior citizen. My grandmother, his wife, she paid poll taxes to vote in Virginia. So to go from, that to me even being able to be somebody's elected official, oh my God, that's just amazing. You get full just thinking about that. So if I have this opportunity, I have an obligation to make them proud and to do things of substance and not to just do it for form or fashion. So for me, I feel very strongly that if I'm going to make sacrifices and not see my sons, I talk to them on FaceTime, not see my husband, it has to be for a reason. So for me, obviously I'm Black, and if I didn't have any of those people, a husband or kids, I would still be doing the same things I'm doing, but it just means so much to me to create a better world for them and for all the other Black children out here. And then also, we always hear the Shirley Chisholm quote, if you don't have a seat at the table, pull up a folding chair. And there's a version of that some of us have heard, that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. So I feel really strongly that people will either erase opportunity or not even conceive of the opportunity you need simply because they don't know you. So people need to know me so that they can know my family, so they can know my community, so they can know my district, so they can know my city, just like they need to know Delegate Wilkins so that they can know all the different people she represents in the history within her as an immigrant. There's all these things within us that we're bringing to the table that haven't been at that table. And people are, even if they don't know us, they are hoping that someone like us is doing right by them. So I feel like it's an honor, not a burden, an honor.
Thank you both for joining us. Delegate Wilkins is my sister in many fronts, and I hope she's telling people to go tend on them yard and until we can get this COVID under control. We see that coming back up, and both of you have been really true advocates for the people, and we appreciate you in the legacy of Senator Carter, and having elected officials who not only fight for us, but are willing to be held accountable by us has been immense, because that tells us that you understand that your power comes from the people and not from title or any other false sense of leadership. So Delegate Wilkins, thank you. Delegate Smith.
And real quick before you, because one
we need to
thing
give
I
him
want
love.
to make sure.
I've been ignoring him. We need to give him love.
No, the one thing I wanted to say, I think, one of the things that I'm sure, just having been observing a legislator for all this time, I'm sure there's a lot of work you all do behind the scenes that people don't see. And there's a lot of advocacy on issues that people don't know that you've done advocacy on. And so, I just wanted to make it a point to make sure people are clear that while the issues that you all have spoken about are issues that you all have championed, you all have, lend a lot of your credibility, expertise to other issues, that weren't necessarily the ones that you all talked about tonight. And I think the beauty of there being more sisters in the legislature is the ability to organize and be able to put more effective pressure, on leadership to deliver on things that they may not have otherwise delivered on. One thing I'm going to talk about later on after this segment is talk about, some of the LBS, isn't happy with all of what's come out. I'm clear that the stuff we did get, we wouldn't have gotten without you all and some of your colleagues pushing in ways that aren't going to be obvious to people who aren't paying attention. So I just want to thank y'all for that work.
Thank you, ladies. We know you
Thank you so
are
much.
on the floor still and doing the work of the people. So we thank you and we want to let you go.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thanks for all of your
coming.
advocacy. See you guys.
Yep. See you
Yeah.
soon.
All right. So what I want to do, just to kind of round us out, there have been a bunch of updates on some of the policing stuff. So I just want to briefly run through that and just, cool, you let me know if anything else that should be sussed out. As we've talked about previously, there were three major issues that we were focused on in terms of policing: Uniform Use of Force Standard, the Maryland Public Information Act, and the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. And so what it looks like we were able to get is a strong use of force statute in the House. And that work was largely led by Delegate Deborah Davis, a Black woman attorney that's on judiciary. So her work was able to get us some good use of force language that's better than what the Senate produced. We were able to get a good Maryland Public Information Act piece of legislation. Just a quick recap for those who aren't familiar. Currently, investigatory records of law enforcement officials are prohibited from public disclosure. So we've been working to try to make sure, we've been working to change the law such that those records can be disclosable to the public, which would allow the public to be able to oversee the police department and how they're disciplining police officers. And so we got a really strong version that comes out of the Senate in the form of Anton's Law, which was sponsored by Senator Carter. And so that's the strongest Maryland Public Information Act. Both those two are substantive wins and things that, were good in terms of what was able to come out of this session. The piece where LBS and the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability continue to be disappointed is the LEOBR, Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, repeal and replace language. Those of us that have been working on addressing the LEOBR, the reason that we focus so much on it is because we were always been clear when you think about the advocacy, both whether you're talking about historic civil rights organizations, all the way to Black Power, Black nationalist, advocacy, one of the consistent threads has been community control, the ability for the community to exercise power over law enforcement. And so we've been pushing for a community oversight. And LEOBR was one of the primary impediments to being able for the community to exercise this kind of power. Unfortunately, what we got out of the Senate was a version that essentially gutted civilian oversight. What some of them will call civilian oversight is really just civilian participation, 2 civilians on a trial board, which is just them being able to be inserted into a police-centric process. The House had a slightly better version. They created, among other things, the police accountability boards. The House bill, from our perspective, is too convoluted, too much process. But the police accountability board said it mandates the creation of in each county, where they get to have quarterly meetings with law enforcement, with leadership in law enforcement, in addition to being able to select both the chair and a member to serve on charging committees that are supposed to review investigations, but they don't have any power to adjudicate and impose discipline. And this is where LBS finds our biggest disappointment, because we find that the biggest deterrent of police abuse is the ability for the community to exercise power over police, which means being able to fire them, being in a position to be able to exert discipline and impose discipline. For us, that's really the standard as it relates to what racial justice would look like in the area of policing. We're not going to get that. We've got a lot of resistance from the idea of giving power to the community to exercise that kind of power. And so right next session and subsequent sessions to really get community oversight. Those of us from Baltimore, we were trying to really get folks in the legislature to be clear about the fact that Baltimore City Civilian Review Board is a great example of why it is that we need to have the power, because the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board, they can review and do investigations, but they don't have any power. And I think a lot of people in Baltimore City are disappointed in that, which is why for us, the importance of having and imposing that discipline is so crucial to actually having civilian oversight, not just civilian participation. One thing, Khalil, I want to ask you about that, because there was a period of time a few weeks ago where, particularly in some of our conversations with leadership, folks seemed like it was jarring to them, this distinction between civilian participation and community oversight, like as if, for me, that they're so different. And there were some folks that are really pushing back against the substance of that kind of distinction. Is that a clear distinction? Because I feel like a lot of people, it makes sense to a lot of people, but curious what you think.
I think sometimes you have people who are in elected positions who actually don't understand what it means to engage community beyond simply participation, but for community to have control over the systems that either govern or systems that they pay taxes into to support the community. There is a clear distinction between participation and oversight. We saw just now in Colorado, they have finally passed qualified immunity being abolished in the state of Colorado, wherein you cannot be a police officer and simply say, you can't hold me accountable for the things that I've done because I am immune from being held accountable to the same laws that everyone else is. We know right now the Derek Chauvin trial is underway. And, he is on trial for the murder of an unarmed citizen. And absent the ability to have oversight, and oversight includes the ability to hold someone accountable for their actions, you are only participating in a process that is someone else's. And the idea that you might sit on a trial board, hear the information, give your opinion, if you are outnumbered by the people who you are supposed to be holding accountable, then they are governing themselves. There's no math that makes that different, right? If you have a review board that has 2 community members and 1 police officer or 1 representative of law enforcement, maybe I could say you've moved closer to community oversight. But just being in the room when the majority of people who make the decision are the peers and colleagues of the people who need to be held accountable, that is merely participation. There is, again, no math that makes that different. For there to be community oversight, it has to be the case that community members have an opportunity to be invested in a process wherein they understand the differences between a situation where someone is trying to attack a law enforcement officer and say they did something that doesn't sound quite right, to what we saw with the Gun Trace Task Force of people having repetitive issues with their veracity, with perhaps doing things that are illegal, beating up civilians, robbing civilians, and yet those are the same people who are holding one another accountable. That is not community oversight. And when you have a situation where you have the inmates guarding the prison, you are not going to have a situation where there is accountability, where there is justice. And when there is not justice, we know that people are in a situation where they're being constantly and persistently engaged in a carceral state that is not about protection, that is about control.
Yeah. I figured that it wasn't that complicated, but it's definitely one of those. It's definitely one of those things where I feel like folks are just trying to run away from the actual thing of giving power to the community, and there's a racialized element to it. I think I mentioned in one of the previous shows, it was a state senator that referred to the idea of community oversight as a kangaroo court, which just goes to show, exactly what I think people think about giving Black people actual power over institutions that govern our lives. So I think we reached our conclusion. This is our last episode of Streets of the State.
Streets to the Statehouse.
Want to again say what?
You were breaking up there a little bit. I want to make sure people are clear where they are.
Streets to the Statehouse. Streets to the Statehouse. So we're reaching this our last episode. Want to appreciate all those that have been watching us, throughout session. This is what we see as a part of our duty to update the community on things that are happening in Annapolis that impact Black people. And so, just want to thank everybody for continuing to support. We've had a lot of gracious support over the time that we've done a podcast from legislators and other advocates. And so we're going to continue to bring you that in years to come. Chloe, you got any part words for us before we sign out?
Yeah, when elections are over, oftentimes people go to sleep, they bury their heads and come up to figure out who they should vote for. And I just want to remind folk, as I said earlier, we are approaching the sine die period, and sine die means that the legislative session is coming to an end. But we don't wait until January to re-engage with policy. This is the streets to the Statehouse. And, there's a long golden brick road from your front steps to Annapolis. And it's important that you remain engaged. It's important that you, before sine die comes, we heard about House Bill 222, House Bill 41. We can continue to put pressure to get what we need today. But when the session ends, let's get in there and make sure we get what we need. We're looking towards next session being able to expand the elected school board in Baltimore City, to make sure that is a majority of elected officials as opposed to a majority of appointed officials, because we are supposed to have oversight over the institutions we pay taxes for to protect and to support our communities. And it's important for us to remain engaged. It's important for us to stay connected. And I want folks to, continue to follow Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle on all their social media platforms, because they are they don't pause with giving information about what is most critical to our communities so we can exercise Black liberation. It's happening year round with them. And so if you want to plug in somewhere, you see an issue that's important, make sure you reach out and continue to learn how you can advance policies that actually give us progress without having to label yourself a progressive. Labels mean nothing if the people are still struggling.
That's a word. That's a word. All right, family. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for all the LBS program and all our relevant social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Go check out our website, lbsbaltimore.com. If you like what you've seen, become a sustainer. This is what powers our organization. Our ability to be independent is predicated off the fact that there are people. I think, we're almost over 620 people that give us money monthly that allows us to be able to be independent and do what we do. So if you like what you've been seeing, please support us that way. Safe travels. Have a good night.
Peace, fam. Support the Black Arts District.
Yeah.